Hello everybody, it's Falshane from the Challenger Approaching Danganronpa streams, and Ryu kind of kicked off this thing where he thought it'd be cool if we all talked about how we came up with the voices that we used on stream, and I figured, why not? He did it. It was a really enjoyable video. If you haven't seen his, go and take a look at that first. It'll better explain an introduction to exactly what we'll be doing here. But in short, we did Danganronpa 1, Danganronpa 2, and we split up the characters so that each of us had about 4 each in both games. And then we just came up with voices for the characters pretty much on the fly. And I'm going to run you through the cast of 8 that I had and try to just explain the complete and utter chaos that I went through in order to develop the voice for each one of these characters to make sure that they each sounded distinct, but not any one of them sounded particularly weird or wrong. So we're going to go ahead and go through Danganronpa 1 first, and then we'll do Danganronpa 2. And this is a bit of a forewarning, a spoiler warning in advance, if you want to call it that. 1, we will be talking about everything that happens in Danganronpa 1 and 2 to the characters in question, so if you haven't seen it yet and you care about not being spoiled, please go watch the streams, go play the game, whatever you need to do to get that over with and come back. And 2, I apologize in advance for anything that happens in this video. Alright, so the first character we're going to start with is actually Togami Byakuya, who is a bit of a either love him or hate him kind of guy. Now, I should say going into this, I did see the Danganronpa 1 anime prior to doing the stream, but there was about a year's difference between when I watched it and when we played it, so some of that did influence how my voices for Danganronpa 1 were, but only in the slightest bit because it had been so long. Now, going off of his title, The Ultimate Progeny, you could kind of already tell that Byakuya had this sort of holier-than-thou, I'm better than you, I always get my way kind of attitude about him. At least that's how he projected himself. And so when I started, I kind of wanted to give him that stereotypical British, snooty gentleman accent. So it would start out with something like, "Oh, I wonder how the poor people are doing today. Oh." Which you can kind of already start to see that was the core base for Byakuya. And, all you really have to do with that is you bring the nasal passage, you really emphasize all of your vowel sounds through that, and you lower your tone just a little bit, and that's how you get this sort of stuffy, it's almost like your nose is stuffed when you're sick, and so you can just kind of immediately transition if you, try to clog up your nose, and it comes out like, I can't believe how tired I am today, I must be sick. But the problem is that Byakuya was still young, he was still a kid. I think he's only 16 or whatever in the game, so he wasn't an adult, and so I kind of wanted to bring him down a little bit to a more childish status. So instead of using that all the way down here voice, I raised the tone, the pitch a little higher, and so you ended up with something that sounded like this. And he needs to have these very sharp, piercing periods, even commas, even his commas are sharp whenever he's talking, especially to Naegi because of their relationship, cough cough. So you end up with something where you've got the nasally quality to it, but there's also this bit of punctuation on everything he says, and you know that the voice is just a little bit higher instead of being down here, and it's a little bit faster because he wants to make sure that you're doing whatever he tells you to do. And so you kind of, it's pretty much the simplest voice, I believe, amongst all of the ones that I did, because if I had to explain it, it would just be that rich, snooty, stereotypical Englishman voice, but a bit harsher and a bit higher pitched, just to make sure that you're still in that, teenager age range. But regardless, you're always aware of when Takami is speaking because you can tell that every sentence has an enunciation and there's just the hint of snootiness in it. I'm not going to tell you what you did, but I expect you to know that it was wrong. Why can't you find this out for yourself, Naegi? No, I'm not going to help you. Why don't you get your lilac-haired girlfriend to do it for you? And next is Celestia Lundenberg, who, as soon as I saw her, I knew this was a character that I was going to enjoy. She has that very obvious, gothic style about her. She's got the twin tails and the, bonnet thing and the whole dress. So you knew that this was a character that felt like she was also going to be a cut above everyone else. You knew that she just felt superior, but unlike Byakuya, who was not afraid of forcing exactly how superior he was down your throat, Celestia was more subtle about it. But the first thing you needed to overcome as a obviously not female voicing a very feminine looking character is that you needed to learn how to pitch your voice appropriately. And fortunately for me, my voice is at a slightly higher range, or at least that's what I've been led to believe. So learning to pitch your voice up just a little bit isn't that hard, especially if you want to go with somebody who's a little more quiet, because then you don't have to worry about enunciating as hard. So this is what I would call the base for Celeste, and because of her mystery, you wanted to get a little breathier about it, so you wanted to make sure that everything she said either had this punctuation or this breathe in or out on every syllable that she said. And because she felt like she was a little more riskier or a little new, like she could take some more risks than anyone else, she always had this sort of trill to every one of her lines. And in fact, sometimes she might even giggle to herself in order to get her point across to show you just how unafraid she was of absolutely everyone around her. So that's basically how I did Celeste. And it's really funny because I think my Celeste voice was one where somebody actually commented that it was almost frightening how accurately feminine it sounded, which I chose to take as a compliment at the time because that's what I was trying to portray. Little did I know that would come to bite me in the behind as time went on, but I did enjoy it over time. But yeah, the most important thing about Celeste is being able to just lower the volume but raise the pitch and bring in that air. You have to make sure that the air's there, and you have to draw out the syllables just a little bit, and don't be afraid to get a little giggly, because you know that in the end it's just a toss of the die, and which one of us is the ultimate gambler. So yeah, that's Celeste. And of course, there's the fact that character development happens, and Celestia turns out to not be all she appears. Well, normal Celestia Lindenberg would sound a little bit like this. And there's a point where she starts to get a little bit more insane about it. She doesn't exactly want to put up with your shit anymore, especially if you're that disgusting fat pig. So yeah, there's that. And she does eventually succumb to the whole trial scenario where she dies, and to do that voice, you just really to bring it up, you gotta press it out. I really don't know exactly how to explain it, but you gotta get a lot more shrill, almost like you want to do that high-pitched scream. You have to press all of the air up, and instead of weaving it out slowly through the words, you just have to compress your lungs at the end of each line with the screech to really make that airy punch come through your voice. So when you see Celestia about to die, or when she's finally getting convicted, you just get something more like this! And so yeah, that's, let's move on, shall we? Alright, now we're gonna get into the real fun stuff. So just a forewarning, if your headphones are plugged in, do make sure to check your volume. So, Ishimaru Kiyotaka, or as we refer to him, just plain old Taka, when I saw this character, and as soon as he storms onto the scene, you know this guy in his, uniform, and his clean-cut hair, and his just big mouth, that he is going to be no jokester. He's the kind of guy that walks into a room and you immediately know he's there no matter where you are in the building. He commands attention, he demands that people pay attention to him, and so what better way to get that across than booming, loud, verbose voices. So the only thing that really came to mind when I was really trying to figure out how to start Taka was I knew I wanted him to have that stereotypical, like, anime protagonist from, like, a shonen fighter anime, like, take your Narutos or your DBZs, and combine it with something from, like, Kamen Rider or Sentai, those really cheesy live-action Saturday morning shows where everybody overacts, and that's exactly how I imagined Kiyotaka, somewhere in the middle there. And so, I wanted him to have one of these dramatic, booming voices, where it was definitely loud, and you could hear every syllable punctuated. And all I'm really doing to achieve that is I'm bringing, like, my throat is sort of tightening up so that you get this broad spectrum, almost announcer-like voice. You can almost imagine hearing that voice saying something like, "Welcome to the Indianapolis 500!" Or maybe even like an auctioneer, like, "Sold to the man in the plaid coat!" So all of those things combined, I also tried to make sure that each time he spoke, it was just unending happiness, unending anger, unending sorrow, whatever his emotions were. It couldn't just be loud, he had to just go full into whatever he was feeling. So if he was happy, it was always something like, "Ah! What a beautiful day for everybody here! I can't believe we're having another wonderful day of school!" And if he was sad, you would get something along the lines of, "No! How could this possibly happen to me? Why?" And if he was angry, you might even get a little bit of, like, Saiyan tossed in there, just because the anger and rage that just builds up completely reminds me of, like, a Vegeta-esque syndrome. And so, especially when they were, like, fighting over Alter Ego. "How dare you bring her into your room! I told him not to do that! Who does he think he is? I shall take him on in combat! In hand-to-hand man combat!" I am so sorry for my neighbors. So many weeks and months of doing that. I'm really sorry, whoever you are. But yeah, you kind of, especially with the anger, you get the rasp up in the voice. You have to kind of, so that's why, I know it sounds really cheesy, but that's why I try to compare it to the growling noise from, like, a DBZ episode, because you gotta combine that growling in with the booming, Bobby. And try to fuse that together, and that's how you really get into Kiyotaka. And it's just a lot of fun of being able to let go and just release all of that energy pent up inside of you. Just burst it all out and extend those sounds. And if you're really feeling it, sometimes you'll let your voice crack. And again, much like Celestia, Taka kind of goes through some character development throughout the story, and he kind of goes Super Saiyan. I'm not exactly sure what the equivalent in Danganronpa is. Like, they get infused with spirit magic. It happens in Danganronpa too, but that's not my character, so I'll leave that for the next person. But anyway, so when Taka makes his transformation, the voice didn't really change too much. I tried to add in a bit of Mondo's, like, grunts and groans and grittiness to it. So, instead of having something like, "Good morning, everybody! What a wonderful day it is to be here amongst you all!" You would get something more along the lines of, "Hey guys, what a wonderful and amazing day it is to be here amongst y'all!" Which kind of brings in a bit more of the nasally, Brooklyn-y accent-y part. You kind of want to toss in those, like, "What did he say about me?" I can't really Ryu's Mondo voice very well, but I tried to toss it in there and mix it in. So you get something that sounds a little bit like this, you son of a bleepin' bleep! Just to try to differentiate it a little bit so you knew it wasn't the same old Taka. Alright, there's really no way to preface this. There's no way to describe what you're about to see. So, I am sorry in advance, and welcome to the wonderful journey that is Fukawa Toko. Now, I am a strange person, and Toko is probably my favorite character in all of Danganronpa of what I've seen so far, which is admittedly only 1, 2, and Ultra Despair Girls. But I did remember from watching Danganronpa the anime that as soon as I found out that I was going to be doing voice acting for this, that I wanted to secure Toko. I love this character from the bottom of my heart, just how expressive she is, how manic and crazy she is. And her strange obsession with Byakuya just makes for this hyper-dynamic character that I really just wanted the opportunity to just blow out of the water. So for the voice, anybody that knows Toko knows that she is extremely reserved, she's shy, but deep down inside, she's actually got this really sort of disgusting, twisted personality where she likes to interpret things that people say the wrong way, but she just can't mingle with society normally. She just cannot. And so in order to bring that out in the voice, I wanted her to constantly be straining with every word, with every sentence she can't get the words out. So that's why she kind of just, everything she says kind of sounds like this. Like she's just stuttering, or she tries to strain out the phrases and she just can't get it out. So yeah, in order to do that, obviously, all you have to do is stutter and, like, try to hold back your breath and hold in the word for as long as you can, and then just force off it real quick. Like, you just start the sentence really slow, like you're trying to think of each syllable, and then quickly just spit out the rest of it so you can get it over with. Like you're trying to confess your love to somebody, which I guess is appropriate. And, like, you're stammering, you don't want to say it, and then you finally just blurt it out. So that forms the patterns of Toko speaking. But for her voice, I wanted her to come off as nerdy, feminine but nerdy, and just, like, she had to be weird. And so that's why I ended up sort of tossing in this high-pitched drill to everything she said. And, like, she couldn't just talk normally. Like, her voice is obviously high-pitched. It's higher than mine, but it's still a little lower and creakier and cracky. Most like she still didn't completely get through puberty. And she was just breathing all the time because she was so nervous. She didn't know what to say or do. And so, that's how Toko came about. So it was somewhere in between the mix of not wanting to give her a really high pitched, cutesy voice. She didn't want to give her like a Celestia voice. So her voice is a little bit lower. It's a little bit crackier, or it's a lot bit crackier. And it's a bit whinier because I know that everything that Toko tries to say, everything she feels is just so restricted and forced through, like stumbling over every sentence because the pure act of communicating with anybody is just painful for her. So I feel like by creating this sort of grunty, like stammery, jokey sort of noises between each stuttering phrase, you kind of get somebody that's everything, it just hurts to talk. Like, why does it hurt to talk? I can't just say the things that I want to say. So it's really fun to voice act Toko. But like I said before, she has this very lascivious obsession with Byakuya, and so while you have to maintain that very grunty, not sure what to do voice, whenever Byakuya comes up, or her master, whenever the topic turns to him, you've got to get real, I don't know how to say this, but lewd with your voice. You've got to get real, like, deeply, dreamingly, wistfully, mildly perverse with the voice, and there's really no other way to say it, because that's what she is, that's what she's doing. And so you have to learn to bring in these deep, breathy words, and like everything you say is just on the verge of becoming, and it's great, because it kind of goes from mixing from being difficult to sounding pleasurable. And so yeah, it's actually not that big of a transition. You just go from having that strained release to adding the heavy breath on top of it, and it just comes out sounding very lewd. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say it, but that's the only way I can think of explaining it, because you just gotta get your voice up a little bit, like another octave each time you bring up another sentence until you're on the verge of finishing off what you're trying to say. This is gonna be on the internet. I mean, more so than it already is. And if that wasn't bad enough, Toko has a split personality. She shares her brain space with a literal serial killer named Genocide Jill or Genocide Jack, depending on which localization you listen to. And Genocide Jack she's just insane. She's literally just this completely psychopathic entity that anytime she has anything to say, it's either comically disturbing, she's trying to kill somebody, she's threatening to kill somebody, she's making, it's not even lewd anymore, it's downright, like, disgusting advances towards Byakuya, and I absolutely love acting these just whacked out, crazy, uncontainable characters, because it really gives you the opportunity to let loose and just let your voice just break free. You don't have to worry so much about maintaining an even keel. You don't have to worry about making sure your voice doesn't blend too much into the character's voice, because it's just so different or so far off from your natural speaking voice that you just break right out of it and can have so much fun with it. So in order to get Jack's voice, I wanted to start with the sort of whiny voice that Toko has, but it had to become a little more manic. You had to make sure that your voice didn't just stay in one candor. It had to just go all over the place. You had to make sure that you kept that sort of heavy voice in there, but all this gravelly, high-pitched, manic sort of twisting and pulling really gave the voice its own identity. So it's pretty obvious that there's no one thing that's going on here. The Genocide Jack voice is such a hodgepodge of so many enunciations and intonations and expressions that all I can really do is say that, there's a gravelly pitch that I add in there. Sometimes I'll, make it a little higher pitch and sweetie, lofty, lilting voice tossed in to give that sort of childish twinge to things. Sometimes it'll just go real down low to get that, addition in there to show you that she's just so insane that her voice is nowhere on a standard spectrum. It goes all the way up here and all the way down here. As long as it maintains that wavering quality, it just gives off the feel of somebody who could do absolutely anything at any time. Their personality wavers just as much as their voice. And the same rules go along with all of her expressions as well. They're a lot like Toko's, because it is still Toko's body that she's acting through, but they have that, psychopathic serial killer wavering madness tacked on top of them to really draw out the insanity. And, of course, where would we be without... Yeah, that's Jill's laugh, which, it's just a cackle. It's just a straight up, no holds bar, reach down into the diaphragm, get all that oxygen, and just screech and belt it out, and then really make your diaphragm contract hard on each of the ends of the syllables, so they each really punctuate, and you get that really high, annoying, terrible, frighteningly voice, and I really don't even know how to describe it myself, but again, it's just something you reach down and you let go of all of your inhibitions and you just belt it out. So yeah, that's Toko. So moving on to Danganronpa 2, the major difference between Danganronpa 1 and 2 is that I had no idea what was going on with Danganronpa 2. There's no anime for it, I had never played it before. We pretty much came right off of Danganronpa 1 into Danganronpa 2. And as Ryu explained before, we were actually assigned roles for Danganronpa 2. So there was no, oh, I want to be that guy because I know what his personality is like, or oh, I want to be that girl because I know she's a lunatic and I really want to play a lunatic in this stream. So we got our roles, and of course, Byakuya shows up again, and it made sense that I would reprise my role. Only this time he was fat. I mean, I don't even know if they explain how. Maybe it's in one of his like personal discussions that we never really got around to. And obviously, the story didn't take place too much later than the first story because he looks about the same age. So I wanted to make sure that I kept his similar voice, but I needed to do something different with it, something to make sure that people understood that Byakuya had changed somehow. And how do you represent fat with your voice? How do you make the sound of fat? What is the sound of one fatting? And in order to do that, there's this really convenient thing where I was blessed with these very elastic cheeks, and those became very important for voicing Byakuya, because in order to get across that he had put on some pounds, I wanted him to sound like every one of his phrases was a little more laborious to get out, that sometimes he might be trying to force the words out through these like hefty cheeks on his face. So you ended up with something a bit more like this. You could tell that the holy Englishman's still back there, but now it kind of sounds like he may have had a few too many flapjacks for breakfast. And in order to do that, I'm maintaining that like traditional Englishman accent thing, but I'm widening my mouth and letting my cheeks fill with air. So instead of just bringing it out like this, you kind of get something a little more like this. You can probably tell that my mouth is a little more open when I talk, and you can probably see my cheeks puff out a bit more, because that's how you get that like sound to each one of his statements, is that air coming through the cheeks or like billowing out. Makes the sound a bit more hollow, almost like you've got like marshmallows in your mouth or something, which gives you that sort of like hefty sort of sound on top of that accent. And yeah, a healthy dose of adding on like or buzz instead of his traditional you get because maybe instead of particularly being haughty, he's out of breath, or he's trying to keep up with everybody else, but it comes out with just this instead, because he's tired, he's heavy, he's carrying all that extra Tagami around. And so yeah, that's if you've ever try to simulate the feeling like if you've ever run for a really long time and you kind of get heavy breathing and you're kind of just like you kind of emulate that part without the breathing in. So that's the general idea of how I altered Tagami. And one of the other things I wanted to talk about is that the ability to make these really sort of visceral, guttural eating noises, because there are scenes, as terrible and stereotypical as it is, there are scenes where they have Byakuya eating a lot of food, like when that whole banquet's put out and he starts like shoveling food in his face. You've got to learn how to manipulate your saliva, which sounds really, really disgusting. But I'm gonna just do a quick demonstration here. If you wanted to have Byakuya eating a lot of food, you would get something like... And all I'm really doing there, as you can probably tell from that disgusting display, is slapping my tongue and my lips around a lot with my mouth full of saliva. So you get this sort of like squishy sound, the squishy, like very fleshy sound, which is to emulate, you know, a lot of food being crushed and moved around with the cheeks and the tongue. So it's really gross and wet and fleshy sounding. But yeah, you just bring the muscles of your cheeks in while like moving your tongue out, and then just keep retracting that motion, and you get the sound of a lot of food being chewed and eaten and swallowed. I am so sorry.
I'll be over here, Makoto, if you need anything. But I suppose that you'll probably have your light-haired girlfriend do all the thinking for you too, anyway. Nah.
Oh, Komeda Nagito, I love you. I know nobody else does, or at least nobody in our particular circle does, but I still love you. Nagito was a character that when I first saw him, he was my first like new character in Danganronpa 2, aside from, again, reprising Byakuya. And when I saw him, he struck me as your stereotypical guy that just, he seemed like he was always going to be a step ahead of you. Like he always knew a little more than you were going to know. Like your rival type character. Imagine you're like Blue versus Red from Pokemon. So I wanted this guy to be a little haughtier. So I wanted him to be a little more knowledgeable or a little more knowing, and maybe he was a little more better than you. Like he always knew that he was going to be better than you. But as I started to play him more, I realized that he wasn't that jerkish, at least not at first. Remember, this is an evolution across time, not like I knew exactly how he was going to act later. So instead, he started to ease back a bit, and you could kind of tell that he still had this haughtiness about him, like he knew exactly what he was going to do or what he was going to say. He may even toss in an insult at your expense, but he was always willing to help. And that's sort of what became Nagito. And in order to do that, you really just have to relax your voice and let it smooth into this gentle candor. And maybe every once in a while you sort of just pause between words in order to let somebody know that you're really gonna punctuate those last few sentences because they probably mean a lot. And there's this underlying of an accent in there. I've had people say that it's like a British accent, and I'm not exactly sure if that's accurate. It may be. It's not what I'm going for, but if that's what it is, then I guess it fits. But I wanted him just to have this smooth, like, accent where you just felt like this guy had some evidence in his back pocket against you, and if you stepped out of line, that he would just be able to smoothly pull it out and say, "Oh, but you didn't have a skill, do you?" And, or, "You don't have an ultimate talent. Oh, you're just a reserve corps student, aren't you?" And I guess, if anything, it kind of reminds me of Pegasus from Yu-Gi-Oh! I only watched that for a short while, but I guess that was sort of my inspiration. Maybe it's the white hair, but that was the basis for him. That's an amazing cross-examination you've got going on there. It would be a shame if something happened to it. I would love to help you out, but as you can see, I'm all tied up. I'm through talking with you. Bye now. But, as I soon found out, there was even more to Nagito than I had originally believed. And Saps also admits that he casted me with Nagito strictly because Nagito snaps. He's kind of insane. So I got to roll right off of Toko and onto Nagito. So when Nagito started to go insane, I didn't want to push it as hard as I pushed Genocide Jack because, again, I wanted Komeda, I still wanted him to be reserved. Like, he he was able to try and hold in that emotion a little bit more, because he was assured that he was worthless, or that he was useless, or that he couldn't help the Ultimates, or all of his self-deprecation. So instead, you'd end up with something a little more like this. Like he wasn't exactly sure. It would be ridiculous for somebody to believe that his luck could possibly help the Ultimates. I mean, he's just a pathetic little useless piece of you-know-what, isn't he? I mean, he could hold it back a little bit more than Jill could. You could still hear the strain in his voice, though. But he could even still get into that point where he would have to laugh. So instead of having the same, like, punctuating, screeching, billowing cackle that Genocide Jack had, he had this sort of trailing, reserved, restrained, like he was trying to get out this laugh, but it just kept, like, slipping out instead of being, like, screamed at the top of his lungs. And that's more of the, again, I guess the British English, but with that manic kind of craziness on top of it, so that you, and so that, again, that's more of the reserved insanity that is Komeda. Oh. No. Next was Sonya Nevermind, who ended up being another one of my favorite characters in Danganronpa 2, and she is probably the character I actually had the most difficulty with, because I had already done several female characters in the past, and I had done Toko, who had a slightly deeper feminine voice. I'd done Celeste, who had a very softer, sweeter voice, and the only thing about Sonya that I could really think of that would differentiate her is that she was supposed to be foreign. They never actually say, like, a real world country that she's from, so it would be difficult to pick a very specific accent and go with it. So throughout my entirety of Danganronpa 2, you could probably tell I was testing out different accents with Sonya. Well, sometimes she would sound like this, and sometimes she would just sound like this, which I didn't know exactly what I was doing with this, but this was definitely something that ended up getting thrown away, because this is just terrible. So, what I ended up going with, it was still a higher pitched voice, but, I kind of, instead of pinning down an exact accent, I gave her this sort of vague pseudo-European accent, maybe somewhere between, like, German and Welsh, and, but instead I tried to make sure that every time she finished a sentence, or maybe on certain words, she would come up and she would stop on each of the words so that you could really tell that she was thinking about what she was saying. And maybe she had to think of how the word was said in English or Japanese in order to get it out of her mouth. So I went more with that sort of enunciation. And then I made sure to give her this sort of sweet voice that really kind of just came through as a feminine, happier voice, because you could really tell that deep down inside she had this pleasant, just really sweet personality about her. And so she just ended up having this punctuated voice that was sort of sweet and sort of happy. Every once in a while you could tell that she just didn't have anything negative to say about anybody. But there were times where she would come out and say things like, "Shut up!" or "How dare you!" And I had to really reach down and get that, like, serious voice that still had that punctuation. "How you stay away from those hamsters!" But in the end, you could always tell that she was happy to go back to her really sweet, charming voice. So in the end, Sonya's voice probably wasn't one that I was most proud of, just because of how long and how hard it took me to really nail down exactly how I wanted her to sound. So I think I probably went a good third to a half of the Danganronpa 2 streams in its entirety trying to find the right place for Sonya. And when I eventually settled on something, I liked it, but it just took me forever to get there. And one of the weird things is that she never really goes through a breakdown. She doesn't go insane. She doesn't snap. She doesn't go through any huge dramatic shift. I mean, she does do some crying, and she does do some, like, I cannot believe this is possible. There is no way that anybody here would kill somebody. But that's sort of easy. You just add the, like, breathiness from crying and, like, the squeak the voice a little bit on the high notes because she's getting emotional. There wasn't anything too technical there. So I guess it's a good thing that she ended up being a really basic character overall, because she was foreign, I guess it's really what made me so awkward around pinning down exactly how I wanted her to sound. But I think I like what I got when we finally got there. Heck yeah! Of course not! We can do it! And last but not least, we have Gundam, Mr. Tanaka. When I first saw Gundam, I knew that I wanted to give him a very ninja-like voice, because I looked at the guy and he looks like a ninja. And, I mean, I knew nothing about him, so I didn't know anything about his 4 Dark Days of Destruction. I didn't know anything about how he was this big, bombastic, kind of loudmouth, pompous, RPG term-spitting kind of guy. And so, when I wanted to start out with him, the thing I wanted to do is I wanted to give him a traditional Japanese, quote-unquote, accent. Something that would sound a little more like this, so his name would be Gundam Tanaka. But the problem with all of that is that it obviously would have come off very offensive, especially if I continued doing it for a prolonged period of time. I had no idea how long he was going to live. So if he ended up being a character that was played throughout the entire stream, I didn't want to risk somebody coming in and actually being offended, or somebody coming in and thinking like, wow, this guy's a huge jerk for like trying to appropriate the Japanese accent for this character who's supposedly Japanese, and etc. etc. So I tried to cut my losses and work around with toying with the accent a bit. So instead of having something that sounds a little more like this, he ended up sounding a little more like this. So he ended up sounding a little more gravelly. And instead of having the traditional Japanese tense about it, it sounded a little more like it was Latin. So instead of being offensive to one culture, I ended up potentially being offensive to a completely different culture. And I think that might have been because Wander's Peko voice was also kind of like Spanish Latin-esque. And so I think when I was trying to meld Gundam away from potentially being a racist stereotype, I backpedaled into Wander's voice a little bit, and so I ended up having this sort of mixture somewhere in the middle. So I don't know, maybe Gundam has Asian Latin ancestry mixed in, and that's why he has 2 colored eyes. It has nothing to do with him being a demon from another dimension. So yeah, you just dig down deep, and you have to make sure that you enunciate, because you are very full of yourself. You are Gundam Tanaka. No one can stop you. So it has a lot of that Taka voice in it too, because he's very enunciated. He's very strong and powerful with his voice, because he likes to think very strongly of himself, and he wants to let everybody know that he has the power of the burning demons inside of his left eye, or whatever his crazy explanations are. So you dig up that graveliness because he's got to be dark and mysterious. And then you apparently use that sort of Latin Spanish accent to give him a bit of this distant, foreign mystique about him. And then you go real hard into the accent to make sure that you bring it home. And that's Gundam Tanaka. Just tossing some cackling in that whenever he that's about how powerful he is, or no one will stop him. And that's how you get the character across. I can't control it. Look at how cute the 4 Dark Devas of Destruction are. They're so cute I could just eat them all up.